Okay, folks, we're going to begin the presentation. I'd like to welcome you to the Mass Youth Soccer 50th Anniversary Workshop in association with the New England Revolution. Let's welcome Kelsey Griffith. Kelsey serves as the Mental Skills Specialist at the McKellie Center for Sports Injury Prevention, an affiliate of Boston Children's Hospital. She has experience working with individuals of all ages and sports, including collegiate teams, Team USA athletes, and Broadway performers. Kelsey's work aims to help athletes navigate the mental challenges in sports to achieve their goals and reach peak performance. Please welcome Kelsey Griffith.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be here. I figured I'd start out with my two quick soccer fun facts. So never in a million years did I envision I'd be spending my honeymoon in the UK seeing Premier League soccer, but that just happened, which was wonderful. Got to see Hearts of Midlothian in Edinburgh, Scotland, and then also got to see Everton play Man City. Sure, many of you are thinking, wow, Man City fan, that's awesome. No, my husband is actually an Everton fan. So not quite as exciting. They did lose, but they tied this morning. So second fun fact is we are also partial season ticket holders to the Revs. And so, again, never in a million years did I envision kind of being on the other side of things here at Gillette, performing and presenting for all of you. So thank you for taking your time this morning. I know you have a really excellent lineup ahead of you. So, mental skills specialist at the McKellie Center for Sports Injury Prevention. I started the program there just about 8 years ago now and have been incredibly fortunate to work with a multidisciplinary team at our facility. I work alongside athletic trainers, strength and conditioning specialists, physical therapists, and our physicians to help provide holistic care for our athletes. Our goal here today, I want to be able to share with you all some tangible, concrete tools that you can take away to use with your athletes, be it your own children or your teams, with the idea that mental skills training, in essence, should be a proactive part of sport training, right? We know that the mental game is incredibly important for our athletes. Athletes are very, very quick to acknowledge that, and yet generally, when I ask, how many kids in a room have engaged in mental skills training, now I get a couple hands. I will say, 8 years ago, I usually, if I was lucky, I got one hand. Now we have a couple hands. But again, the goal is to integrate this into what we do. So before we start, just want to get a good feel for who we have in the audience. So hands up if you are coaches. Figured that was going to be our predominant group here. Any administrators? Awesome, lovely. Any parents of athletes? Figured there'd be some crossover there as well. Any athletes? Amazing, love it. And then any like allied health professionals, athletic training, PT? Okay, awesome. So we have a really nice mix here. And like I said, the goal is takeaway strategies. My aim in every presentation is to say, here are your gem takeaways, things that really can be implemented like the minute you walk out of this space, which is awesome. So, our learning objectives for the day. We're going to start by exploring the multi-role demands of being a student athlete. And let's be real, we know it's a lot, right? And so how to explore these demands, how to navigate them successfully. Then we're going to take a look at the difference between productive and unproductive stress. I think this is a really, really important thing to discuss because right now, and you all may have varying opinions on this, but what I often see in my sessions one-on-one with athletes is a pretty significant stress distolerance, right? I think the mentality is that to be okay, I should feel no stress, no sense of overwhelm, everything should be happy and awesome all the time. And I usually start my presentations with kids especially by saying, people think I talk about puppies and rainbows all day. My job is actually to say that what these student athletes are doing is incredibly challenging, and I want to be the one to help them develop these tools to navigate that adversity successfully, because stress is a really, really important part of our everyday existence so long as we use it effectively. And then finally, again, this is our takeaway, talk about some of the mental skills strategies that can help these student athletes or human athletes, if you will, maintain balance in spite of these demands in order to reach their optimal performance. All right, so to start, what is performance, right? Performance, in essence, is the execution of an action. It's something accomplished. And I start today's presentation because this really is at the root of this whole conversation, right? If we want our student athletes to be able to maintain optimal performance, we need to recognize that performance exists in a variety of arenas. And so why mental skills? If performance can cross a multitude of arenas, be that academics, athletics, relationships, so many different spots down the road, job performance, we need to understand how to perform to the best of our ability, regardless of the circumstances that we're in. So, mental skills training has been shown in research to improve adaptability, confidence, and resilience. How many of you are hearing these words a whole lot more now than perhaps even just a couple years ago? Yeah, right? Like, coaches are saying it. I'm sure you're all saying it. We hear it in professional sports, which is awesome. I remember watching the 2022 Olympics, and I just sat there being like, this is all I do. This is all I do, right? All of the commentators were really focused on how these athletes are demonstrating these sorts of qualities. Now, when I start to work with athletes, 9 times out of 10, they've shown up in my office and have no idea why they're there, right? Totally fair. Mom and dad made the appointment. They were referred by one of our physicians, word of mouth. And so the story I tell them comes from my own experience as a gymnast when I was younger. I was 10 years old. I remember standing on balance beam, terrified to go for a skill. My coach looked at me and said, "You need to be more confident." And I stood there and I was like, you're right. I would love to be more confident. And I stood there and I stared at him and I waited for him to tell me how to do that, right? Because he was my coach and he taught me all of the other things and he just stared at me. I was like, cool. So I hopped off the beam. I went to get a sip of water and my 10-year-old brain said, okay, maybe by the time I get back, I'll have figured this out. Lo and behold, I didn't. And frankly, I quit the sport not a long time thereafter because in my 10-year-old's mind, I just wasn't confident enough to be a skilled gymnast. I had a lot of talent, but my mental game was the thing getting in the way. Here I am, 25 years later, essentially doing the thing that I certainly would have benefited from as a 10-year-old gymnast, and even more so as a student in high school pursuing academic excellence, as a student in college, and a performer and dancer in college striving to be my best. So, again, we're gonna focus a lot on all that's being asked of these kids: academic demands, athletic demands, and human demands. If the goal is to help them be successful, we need to take into account the value of mental skills training just in the same way we do their physical training, right? We think about how many hours these athletes are giving to their sport from a physical standpoint. Even if we can integrate mental skills training 5 minutes a day, I always say to kids, like, I know you have a lot going on. Again, biggest word of today, demands. Let's just take 5 minutes, right? Because that part, integrating that into what you do is going to become super, super powerful. And just consider, if we can proactively educate our athletes to build their mental resiliency, chances are they're going to be better able to navigate what's in front of them and come out on the other side successful. Now, keep in mind, success can vary, right? Success might be getting the win, or success might be losing, but being able to acknowledge, like, man, we killed it out there today, right? That, to me, is success. Obviously, with lots of our coaches here, right, the win is important, and I'm never going to deny that to an athlete. Kids are competitive for a reason, but helping them to understand how they look at success, there's our proactive education. Empowering athletes with the resources to feel their best both on and off the field. Kids often exist in a world of hierarchy, right? Coaches are here, they're here. Teachers are here, they're here. How do we instill in them a sense of advocacy, a sense of being able, again, to navigate challenge in a way that they come out on the other side having grown? And then finally, and this is a big one we'll touch on today, consider helping athletes to understand that they are more than their sport, right? This is our human athlete element of today. Sport is so important for youth athletes. But as sport becomes more and more competitive, we start to see an identification with our sport. And in that, how do athletes actually start to define their self-worth with their successes in their athletic endeavors, right? Can be really powerful, but when success starts to fade away and however they're generally defining it, that can be very challenging for them. So we do all these things. We're going to have a happy me, for sure, and likely we're going to have happier kids who are intrinsically driven to go out there, enjoy what they're doing, and get the job done. All right, so here are our demands. Students, be present in school for 6+ hours, right? You're asking these kids to sit, listen, absorb, engage, inquire, do homework for every class, study for, take quizzes, tests, do presentations, and do them well, right? Always at that 100%, and then go to extracurriculars. Heavy. Athletes, be involved in multiple teams and sports, but also make sure that you're giving 110% to all of those multiple teams and sports, and probably participate in at least one of those sports all year round. So I mentioned earlier I was a gymnast. Gymnastics was year-round. That was just how the sport worked. Then I was a dancer, also all year round. I always joke with my athletes. I remember being in high school, I knew 2 people who played on club soccer teams. That was it. And I knew they were good. And they both went D1, right? It was a very, very different world. Now, that's not to say that the world as it is now is bad. Absolutely not. It's just how things have changed with that increasing competitiveness. But again, to help our athletes meet the demands of that competitiveness, we have to change our tactics. We have to integrate this stuff. So they're going to practices and games. They're staying healthy. How many of you have kids or athletes who've gone to PT? And they love every second of it, right? They go to strength and conditioning. They go to workshops. They go to camps, ID clinics. And then they also have to put in the work at home, right? What are you doing outside of your practice to make sure you're staying on top of your skill and on top of your game? Also heavy. It's a lot, right? Now, the reality is that to achieve this high level of performance that so many of these athletes want, they are going to have to meet these demands. They are going to have to put in significant time, dedication, energy, and yet, I'm sure we're hearing these sorts of things. I have so much homework to get done. How many of you have kids who come home from practice and are up until 11 o'clock doing homework? Yep, absolutely. Waking up early to finish practices or finish quizzes, quiz prep, test prep, assignments? Absolutely. I have to get to practice early to warm up. So not only am I driving 45 minutes to go to practice, I then have to be there 45 minutes early to make sure I get in my injury prevention so I can stay healthy, so I can get on the field and do what I need to do. I always joke, I was really good at putting on a leotard in a car. Not an easy task, right? But I was leaving school, I was driving right to practice, I had to change, I had to eat a snack, and maybe get some homework done if I was lucky. I need a snack, right? They're hungry. They're running from place to place. I'm sad I can't go to my friend's birthday party. You know, they have to make sacrifices. Should I go to my club practice or my town travel game? How many of you have had kids who have had to make that decision? Absolutely. My family's going on vacation, but I have a tournament. I have to travel here instead, maybe with a family friend because their kid's also going, but my parents are going to Jamaica, right? And I need more sleep. They're tired. They're doing a lot. But again, it's the reality. And most of the time, they like it, right? Like they want to work hard. They want to see success. But again, navigating all of this requires a certain skill set that sometimes we're not being proactive in. So I think to start, an important piece to address is that not all stress is created equal, okay? Stress is simply demand placed on the mind or body. We need stress to grow and to become stronger. When we encounter good stress, that's our eustress, right? We interpret it in one particular way. And then when we encounter things where we don't necessarily feel we have the resources to meet those demands, that's our distress. That's when that sense of overwhelm really starts to take over. And so what I wanted to share here quickly was it's a little clip, I'm going to read it to you, sorry, from an NPR segment with Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She is a health psychologist and lecturer at Stanford University who's known for her work in what they call science help, which in essence is translating insights from psychology and neuroscience into practical strategies to help maintain health and well-being. So what she says: can changing how you think about stress make you healthier? And here, the science says yes. When you change your mind about stress, you can change your body's response to stress. Your heart may be pounding, you might be breathing faster, maybe breaking out into a sweat. And normally, we interpret these physical changes as anxiety or signs that we aren't coping well with the pressure. But what if you view them instead as signs that your body was energized, was preparing you to meet this challenge? That pounding heart is preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, it's no problem. It's getting more oxygen to your brain. Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard. They were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were less stressed out, less anxious, and more confident. But the most fascinating finding to me was how their physical stress response actually changed. She goes on to say that their response to stress was actually similar to what happens in moments of joy, right? So simply learning to re-educate what those physiological responses felt like, what they could mean, helped change the way they actually responded to stress. So she finishes by saying, I no longer want to get rid of your stress. I just want to make you better at it, right? And I think this is a really important and an insightful look at how valuable stress can be if we utilize it effectively. Now, I'm going to add in a slight caveat. I'm incredibly fortunate at Children's. I work alongside clinical psychologists and social workers who work with our athletes, right? Mental health, huge, important conversation. There are going to be instances where stress becomes debilitating, and that is insanely important to recognize, acknowledge, and address appropriately. But again, can mental skills, can learning coping tools ahead of time actually be a way to help athletes perhaps get to that place where stress is debilitating? And the way I like to look at it, and something I use when I teach classes and when I work with athletes, is I use the phrase, we're not trying to get rid of the butterflies, we're trying to make them fly in formation, right? Instead of that chaotic feeling of like, oh my gosh, this is so much, it's overwhelming, have them fly in an organized fashion, right? Because then you're filling the tank. Then you're energizing your body to take on the task at hand. And what I'd like to do now, you all are going to have to be active participants today, so I apologize in advance. I know it's still a little early. But what I want you to do is think about a time in your life that you were super, super excited. Like, you might have to travel back in time. That's fair. I know a lot of my athletes will use, like, first trip to Disney World or, like, Christmas morning, birthday morning. I want you to think about a time, and I want you to take a second to identify, how did that excitement present in your body? What did that excitement feel like? Thoughts? Again, physical reaction. Anyone have something they're willing to share? There's no wrong answer. It's the best part of my job. Yes. Wedding day. Oh, is this your wife here? No, I was gonna say an ex. I was gonna say that's a really good answer. There we go. So what did that feel like for you? Laughing, right? Absolutely. This kind of like bubbly potential inside of you, and you're like chattery and probably like all the way up here. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yes, in the back. First daughter's birth, wonderful. And what did that feel like to you? But a wonderful moment, right? Amazing. So now, flip the situation. I want you all to think about a time when you were wicked stressed. I can say wicked because I'm here in Boston. What did that feel like? Anyone willing to share? Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have kind of that physical and cognitive response. Anyone heart racing when you're super nervous? Yeah, in the back. Say again, I'm sorry. Yes, 100%. And how did that feel in your body? Pain. 100%. Absolutely. Well, so when we look at the physiological response to stress, excitement and nervousness, the responses are exactly the same, right? Racing heart, sweaty palms, dilating pupils, the butterflies in our belly. What happens is, though, there's a cognitive labeling piece to how we interpret that experience. And so when it's wedding day, right, the bubbly potential I said earlier, that is viewed as a really positive experience. When it's PKs, and perhaps, PK experience could be different too, right, depending on, the goalie in front of you. Like if you got it in on them before, you're like, I know I can do this, that excitement might actually rise to the top. But if it's like star goalie of like the state championship team and you're like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go, right? Like suddenly that stress response and the cognitive labeling of this is a threat moment might actually be the thing that supersedes in that instance. And so getting athletes, I like to use the word nervous-sighted, right? I actually had 2 kids very early on in my career, totally separate sports. One was a soccer player actually trying out for the ODP national team. The other one was an Irish step dancer going to Ireland for Worlds. Totally didn't know each other, similar age. Within the same week, both used the word nervous-sighted. And I have used it since then because I think it's a really excellent way to help acknowledge that this stress response, depending on how your brain looks at it, can be a really, really positive force for good. Make sense? Absolutely. Because again, I'm not going to look at a kid and say, we're going to get rid of your stress. Like I would be bad at my job and I would be lying to them, right? I like Dr. McGonigal, I just want you to be better at stress, okay? So, another moment of active participation. This is an exercise I use all the time with my athletes. Writing is really powerful. Like seeing in front of you what's going on in your head, thinking about thinking. It's kind of a weird concept. Very insightful and brings to light a lot of things. So what I'd love for you all to do right now, take out your phones or something to write on, and I would love for you just to write. What's in your head? What are you thinking about? If you start out by saying, Kelsey's making me do this and I think it's stupid, totally fine. I take full ownership of that. But pen to paper, fingers to keyboard on your phone, just start. You will be amazingly surprised at how things start flowing once you start thinking, okay? So I said 2 minutes on here, but let's do a minute-ish, all right? I'll time you. Start writing. All right, wrap up whatever thought you're on. I'm curious, for how many of you did it kind of become almost like a to-do list? Things that like you're thinking about, you might need to pay attention to later? Absolutely. Anyone get a little overwhelmed seeing the things that they have to think about and do about later? A little bit, right? Other trends. Anyone notice anything in what they were writing? What? Yes. They all connected. Kind of like started from one thing that led to the next to the next. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Yes. Things you worry about. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else have some worries on there? Yeah, right? We're human. So here's the thing. Our thoughts are totally normal, right? Worries, to-dos, what ifs, past concerns, right? When I work with an athlete, again, we're not eliminating these things. What we are trying to do, since, again, the demands are there, they have to go to school, right? Like I talk a lot about like language and the power of language and how have to is often very stressful. The truth of it is like some of this stuff is a have to. You have to go to school. You have to get your homework done. You have to help mom and dad out at home, right? Like that stuff exists. And so noticing patterns in our thoughts, recognizing the normalcy of those thoughts, and then saying, how can I make conscious choices about what to do with those thoughts? Because I'm curious, lots of coaches in this room, how many of you, and there's nothing wrong with this, I promise, have ever thought or said to your athletes, when you step on the field, I need you 100% here? Anyone? You can raise your hands. There's, like I said, nothing wrong with it. My husband works in collegiate sport, and we were having a conversation about that concept, right? And I said, I was like, yes, that's at the root of it. They have to be present. They have to be at practice, ready to get the job done. But if they're not being provided with the tools and strategies to do so, it's actually a really big ask, right? Because, again, let's go back to my time in high school and the two people I knew playing club sports. Now, I actually had an athlete the other day who I said to, I have seen thousands of appointments at my job, and I think this athlete is the first true seasonal sport athlete I have ever worked with. I literally had that moment. I was like, is that possible? And she was like, is that possible? And I was like, I think it might be, right? So there's a lot. There's so much going on. And if we want them to be focused, we have to address the humanness of what they're dealing with. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, so what do we actually do then? Now we dive into kind of the tangible strategies. We're going to skip over the Mentimeter. All right, staying in the present. Super important. Mindfulness, right? Now, mindfulness is a conversation that could be an entire presentation on its own, but at the root of it, mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Jon Kabat-Zinn is credited with bringing mindfulness to the Western world around the 70s, but in actuality, it's a practice that's been around for thousands of years. Again, could be a whole own discussion, but what I want to do today is touch on 2 quick strategies that we can implement with athletes to help them stay mindful and present in what they're doing. Because the research shows that being mindful is incredibly important. Harvard found that happiness is inversely related to mind wandering, or the amount of time that we spend traveling through thoughts of past and future. How often our minds leave the present and where they tend to go is actually a better predictor of our happiness than the activities in which we're engaged, right? So if we can work to educate our athletes on how to stay present, instead of going back to my gymnastics story, instead of be present, be here, be focused, how do we actually do that? I joke, I'm like an obnoxious English teacher. I'm always looking for the details. When my kids say, well, I want to be more focused, I want to be more mindful, I want to be more confident, I always say, cool, how do we do that? How do we climb that ladder, build and develop that skill set? So this is our happy face hanging out in the present, right? My physical body is here in this space with you all at Gillette. Our brains, as you can probably identify from the brainstorm we just did, your 1.5 minutes of brainstorming and thought production, like to hang out in the past, and they really like to hang out in the future as well. So I'm curious, if you look at what you just wrote down, how many of you feel that you are a hang out in the paster? Who has more thoughts in the past, at least in this moment? How about the future? Yeah, that's a big one, right? So think about our athletes. When they step on the field, they know it's a big moment. They're thinking, we have to get that win. What if I make a mistake? What if I go to take that PK and I miss and the game is on me, right? That's going to make it really hard to actually stay present on what they're doing. And forget the fact that these athletes outside of the sport realm could be thinking, I have 4 tests to study for later, right? Or, man, I'm really hungry and I didn't get that snack that I needed in the car. Or, oh, mom's going to be really mad when she finds out I forgot to unpack my lunchbox, right? Human thoughts that, in essence, pull from the tank, right? We want these athletes to be on the field, present, ready to go, full tank of gas. Thoughts that occur are going to draw from that tank. Now, it's not to say, again, that those thoughts are wrong or silly that they're there or they're thinking about it. It's normal. It's life. And so what do we do about it? Breathing. I will say I bring up breathing and I 100% get eye rolls, like 9 times out of 10, because how many of you have ever had someone in a time of stress say to you, just take a breath? I've been there, right? Is that relaxing? Not so much, right? Because then you like try to take a breath and you're like, now I'm more stressed and I'm like failing at breathing too. Like, no, it's this double layer of failure and they don't really know where to go from there, right? Taking those PKs, right? You don't just take a PK in a game and hope it's going to work. You put in the work, you practice it outside of the game so that then when you step into that situation where the stakes are higher, you can trust in your foundation and you can get the job done, right? So with breathing, here's your first gem takeaway. I like to use a strategy called 3-3-6. Simply, in for 3, hold for 3, out for 6. I encourage my athletes to practice this in the morning when they first wake up, 5 times. It's 1 minute of their life, right? I also encourage them to do it at night before they fall asleep. If it puts them to sleep, awesome, love it. But again, what this strategy does is it actually helps flip us out of fight or flight, right? That's breathing, right? Getting oxygen to the body, readjusting from that fight or flight into what we call rest and digest. When we are in fight or flight, it's really, really hard to be in the present and to think clearly, right? If we think ancestrally and from this kind of place of survival, if I'm facing a bear, I don't want to have the time or capacity to be like, what are my options right now? I will be dead, right? Not a good moment in past lives. Our kids aren't necessarily encountering bears all the time, but they are encountering all of these demands that put them into fight or flight because it's stress, right? And it's because they're interpreting it perhaps in that place of threat. Make sense? So 3-3-6, 1 minute in the morning, 1 minute in the evening. Now, I will be the first to say, my athletes will often tell me they do not have time for anything else. I used to be like, yeah, you can figure it out. But now, I actually very much understand where they're coming from, and I never want to be the one to add one more thing, right? Mental skills training, in essence, should be a helpful tool for them. Don't want them to come to resent it. And so what I like to talk about with my athletes is something called habit stacking. How can you build new habits off of existing habits? So if practicing when their alarm goes off in the morning just isn't working, they're too sleepy, groggy, whatever, they press the snooze, we talk about strategies to find ways to build this new habit off of things they already do. Brushing your teeth, right? Hopefully kids are doing that twice a day, morning and at night at least, right? Little sticky note on the bathroom mirror, 3-3-6. So they go in, they brush their teeth. When they're done, they do their 1 minute. Plugging in their phone. When they go to bed, I plug in my phone. There's a nice little, I'm a big fan of sticky notes. Nice little sticky note that says 3-3-6. Take that minute, engage in that strategy, because when we breathe, we can only be in the present. So that's strategy mindfulness number 1. Number 2, mindful walks. Kids are running from one activity to the next. What they can do is getting out of the car, running across the field to get to practice, to drop their stuff and start their warm-up. Choose a sense. As you move from the car to the fields, pay attention to that one sense. So if you choose sound, hear the cars around you. Is there a beeping horn? Is there a bird? Can you hear the footsteps of your teammates running past you to beat you to the sidelines, right? Paying attention to our senses helps ground us in that physical space in the present. And again, it is one more thing, but it is one more thing that's easily, if you will, habits take time and are hard to develop, but relatively easily can be implemented given their already busy schedule. All right, so now we look at this idea of athletic identity. And this is where we really kind of dive into the humanness of these kids. Athletic identity is defined as the degree to which an individual identifies with the athlete role. There's a lot of goods: strong sense of self, confidence, an increased dedication to health and fitness, and improved performance. The cons: it really can impact how an athlete defines their sense of self-worth. I spoke to a brief moment before. If an athlete solely identifies with their sport, if they are not experiencing success or what they define as success in that sport, that actually becomes internalized to their whole worth as a human being. So for instance, I was recently working with an elite level skier. For most of her career, she saw incredible success. Like, we're not just talking like on the podium, we're talking first on the podium for almost her entire career. As she became older, and college pressures crept in and getting pulls from coaches crept in, things started to crumble a little bit. And for the first time, this thing that she so strongly identified with was, in essence, failing in supporting her sense of self-worth. So we spent a lot of time looking at who she was outside of that sport to recognize that her sense of satisfaction, her sense of pride in her effort and her work actually existed in a ton of other arenas. But for 17 years of her life, the focus was, well, what are you doing in skiing, right? And expanding and exploring those concepts can be really, really helpful in redirecting the athlete's attention to those other areas of performance, like we talked about, where they, again, are experiencing success, and success in a range of ways, right? Success doesn't mean the win. It doesn't necessarily mean coming in first or having the fastest time. This athlete just yesterday said to me, I had a race. It didn't go super well. I came in 9th, but I was really proud of how I skied. And in that race, she had a moment, the snow conditions were terrible. She noticed herself hold back. And so then 2 races later, horrible snow conditions, she actually had a moment where she was like, I know this feeling and I know what I need to change. That's success, right? Being able to say, this is hard. Just because I didn't get the result I wanted doesn't mean or undermine the work, the focus, the confidence that I have in what I do. So, looking at athletes as pieces of the puzzle, all of the pieces need to be full, right? If any of you have kids and puzzle piece goes missing and the kid's like totally distraught because now they can't see the whole picture, that's like our athletes. We need all of the pieces to be full so that they understand all of the things they bring to the table. We have those questions like, who am I outside of soccer? We have those questions like, what are my strengths? What qualities do I bring to the table every day in all of the things that I do? Because chances are, if you have a kid who is dedicated, motivated, persistent, confident in one arena, maybe it translates to other arenas, but if not, we also can harness those skills, identify those skills, and work to translate them to other arenas. So again, they start to see successes there. Challenge them to find ways to implement self-care. This word I know I think is a little buzzwordy, but it is really important. What fills their cup outside of their sports? And then explore free time. They don't really know what that is, and that's legit. Again, going back to the fact that they have these demands, they have to get these things done, but 20 minutes of free time can be really productive. 20 minutes of free time might mean not sitting and doom scrolling on your cell phone, right? If we can create intentional choice behind what that free time looks like, chances are they're actually going to garner a lot more from it. I like to use the analogy of slices of the same pie. This can be a great exercise. I will literally have an athlete draw a pie in my office. I'm like, be as creative as you'd like. What are the pieces of the pie? Chances are soccer is going to be a big piece. That's cool. I'm good with that. But asking them to answer the question, I am a sister, brother, son, daughter, friend, artist, musician, scholar, right? Whatever they can come up with, they start to see that, yes, soccer is a big part of the pie, but there's a lot of other pieces too, right? And if they can identify those slices from a really young age, what sometimes happens is the percentage of the pie shifts. But they already know that, like, it's okay to have different pieces of the pie, and it's okay that in different parts of their life, different pieces of the pie might mean a bit more, right? Again, it's conscious choice, it's recognizing, it's noticing. This idea of the pie, and going back to the previous slide about identifying strengths, another question I use a lot is I am ... affirmation statements, right? Helping them to identify, I am a fighter, right? So if, for that skier, we did a lot of work on that idea of fight. She wasn't believing I am capable at that moment. And that's okay. She wasn't seeing the success to build enough of a foundation to trust that she could get the job done. But time and time again, she was fighting. She was persisting no matter what was put in front of her. She was using information effectively, right? So you start to kind of expand the idea of I am successful to what are the pieces that actually contribute to that success. Gratitude. Another really, really excellent tool that can help ground our athletes. Why does it matter? It brings about feelings of happiness. It encourages pro-social behavior and can actually improve physical health, so lowered blood pressure. What can these athletes do? Gratitude journal. I put 3 things on here. I was running through this presentation with my husband last night, and he was like, well, I only do 1. I was like, okay, well, we can do 1. That's fine, right? So again, whatever works is not a one-size-fits-all. Create a journal. Do it in their phones, right? They have their phones all the time. Keep a running tab. I will be honest, it was in the New York Times at the start of this year, keeping that running list of gratitude. I'm trying my best. It's not a perfect science. Building habit takes time. So when I see a client, and if they come in, I'm like, how are we doing on gratitude? And they're like, I keep forgetting. I'm like, okay, let's strategize about how we can help you remember, right? Gratitude letters can be really, really cool. Writing letters to past coaches or teachers or people in their lives that they feel thankful for. And gratitude ping pong is actually a really fun exercise to do in a group. Literally, like with your teams, you could pair off athletes, triple off athletes, and have them pass a ball, kick a ball back and forth. And each time they get the ball, what am I thankful for? It can be soccer-specific things, but I also really encourage them to think about things outside of that soccer arena. Also really important to ask good questions. So again, talking about success, maintaining optimal performance, we need to know, what does that look like? Like I said, for my skier, yeah, it used to be coming in first. That was really, really important for her because it was so much a part of her experience. That started to shift a little bit as the pressures changed, the expectations changed. I encourage my athletes to ask questions that help them evaluate and assess their performance rather than judge. Things like good, better, how. What was good? What can be better? How am I going to work towards that? Help the athlete to associate their moments of success with effort and process. So I was successful because I did X, Y, and Z, right? It puts them in the driver's seat and gives them actionable things that they can continue to pursue in light of that success. Good, better, how also helps athletes to separate moments of failure from the human. This goes back to that idea of athletic identity, that how many of you have ever done the I failed, so I'm bad at that thing? Like we make that jump, and it feels really aggressive to do that, right? You're like, that's such a silly connection to make. Just because I messed up in this one moment does not mean I am bad at this thing. But we do it, And so recognizing that I failed does not mean, and therefore I'm a failure. It's I failed, cool, what's next? That's our how, and that's what helps them keep moving forward. Now, when we look at this idea of moving forward in pursuit of our goals, we're talking about motivation, right? And at the root of why youth get involved in sport is fun. Now, having fun does not mean not working hard and not being competitive, right? Unfortunately, sometimes I hear that from my athletes. Whether it is perception, intention, not my call to make, but recognizing the power of fun in helping athletes to feel in charge of pursuing personal excellence, personal improvement, so important. So we want to encourage that intrinsic motivation. We want them to have that sense of pride in their work. We want them to know what they're interested in and why they're excited to keep moving forward. Again, extrinsic motives are always going to be there. Like I said at the start of this, I'm never going to look at a kid and be like, winning doesn't matter. I would be bad at my job, and parents would not have their kids coming to see me. So, yes, extrinsic motives are there. They are powerful, and we are hungry for them, right? When we want that win, we are going to go after it. But the problem with extrinsic motives is they are uncontrollable. I always give the example, and it's usually soccer. I say, all right, I go to one soccer team's bench, and I say, what's your goal for today? What's the goal going to be? To win. All right, now I'm going to go to the other bench, and I'm going to say, what's your goal for today? What are they going to say? To win, right? And going back to this idea that we can play and perform amazingly, right? I'm sure you all have been a part of or had kids who are a part of a team that absolutely crushes a game and they lose. Because the other team's job is to go out there and absolutely crush the game and try to win, right? So helping them to recognize the incontrollability, the instability of the extrinsic motives, and the stability of their intrinsic motives gives them that kind of recipe to move forward in the face of challenge. This idea really, intrinsic, extrinsic motives really kind of speaks to this concept called the self-determination theory. It's a theory proposed by DC and Ryan back in the 80s. And the idea is that while humans have an innate drive towards success, they want to grow, they want a sense of fulfillment. To achieve that, there are three things they want to go after. Autonomy, right? The feeling that one has choice in behavior. So when we look at athletes who are engaged in a gazillion and two practices a week, they're putting in the work when they're at home, as coaches, start to think, how can we create choice in training? Again, as coaches, you have an objective. You are going to need to get your job done just in the way the athletes are working to get their job done. But when you can integrate, pull an exercise out of a hat. If you say, okay, we're working on defensive play right now, here are three things we can do. It goes in a hat, one of your players picks it out, right? There is now autonomy in that. There's surprise in that. And that can be a really powerful drive in maintaining that intrinsic motivation. Same thing for when they're working at home. I love pull out of a hat. I was with a friend recently, and her son was out back, and he was like, I don't know what to do. And like, what should I practice, Mom? And he was so excited to go out there and do it. But he was also then struggling kind of with like, what's the right thing? And I was like, create choice for yourself. Like, put it in, give your favorite three exercises, put it in a hat, pull it out. That's what you get to do today. Competency. We strive to experience mastery in what we do. Help athletes celebrate this, right? Athletes, especially highly competitive athletes, are going to be self-critical, right? And we all are, right? That's how we improve and grow. The analogy I give is that if we are only self-critical, we are only looking at the things we need to do better, we're chipping away at a rock, and eventually the rock's going to go away. Right? You just keep chipping, We need to reestablish the foundation. We need to bolster that self-critique with what we're doing well, right? And again, focusing on what we're doing well is not the puppies and rainbows thing. It's I'm doing well, and here's why. Here's what I'm doing to be in charge of that success. So as coaches, keep a whiteboard with list of wins. Every day after practice, each athlete writes down one thing. Now you have a collection, right? So they come back after a hard practice, they're wiped, they're spent, they're wiped and spent. Look at the board. Today was hard, but look what you guys have done, right? It helps to reinforce that rock and that sense of mastery and competency. And then relatedness, right? This is our third piece of the self-determination theory. We like to feel connected. It's really important. Team sport, obviously soccer, there is an inherent nature in that. But as coaches, as administrators, how do you create a culture wherein you are encouraging the pieces of the puzzle that lead, again, to success? And how are you defining that success for your athletes so that they can feel collective in their efforts towards that common goal? So lots of information. I just sports psych 101 you in about 50 minutes. So we're going to have times for questions, but our quick wrap up. The goal here, build a strong foundation that supports the human elements of the athlete. Recognize they are not robots. There is not an on and off switch that when they step on the field, we can flip, so they are 110% there. If you want them 110% there, we as educators need to feel empowered to empower them with the tools to be 110% there. Equip your athletes with the resources to navigate challenge. Sport is hard. That's okay. We love that, right? We want challenge because if we can work through that challenge and come out on the other side successfully, it is only going to reinforce that sense of confidence, that sense of trust, and that sense of preparedness. And then support the athlete's why as much as you can. Ask them, why do you guys like this? If it's a hard day of practice and you notice your athletes aren't engaged, take a second. Why are we here today, guys? They might stare at you like you have 12 heads. I get that a lot. But if you start asking those questions and you regularly use those sorts of questions, they're going to get so much better at knowing what is driving them. We all need to know our why, especially when it's hard, right? Because if we don't know our why, then when we encounter that challenge, it's a whole lot easier to be like, hands up, I'm good, right? We don't want them to say, hands up, I'm good. I don't want to push through this. We want them to say, this is why I'm here. Yes, it is hard, but yes, I am prepared to handle that challenge. Awesome. And that's me. The McKaylee Center, we have 2 locations, both Waltham and Norwood. Norwood's not super far from here. My contact information, welcome any questions now or via email. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yes. We got a mic coming to you.
Thank you for all the information.
Of course.
Can we go back to that last slide that you had? 'Cause
My
I thought the wrap-up slide was really good.
Yeah.
So my question is based off of this one right here. How can we as coaches support our athletes that do several sports at the same time?
That's a great question.
Because I have some of my players that are running from basketball to soccer practice, or in the springtime, soccer to baseball or lacrosse, and I want to find a way to not overload them, but still support them at the same time. So.
That's a really good question. I don't know that there is one particular answer to that, but I do think having conversations that set expectations at the start of a season can be really helpful. I know there was one organization I worked for specifically where a number of the kids did participate in club sports, were playing, that sport in particular year round, but the coach actually at the start of the season said, listen, hockey is not, spring is not our prime time. So if you play baseball in the spring, that's okay. Do you know what I mean? And of course, every organization is going to have varying, rules, regulations around those expectations. So if you don't necessarily have that flexibility to make those sorts of boundaries at the outset, totally okay. If you can't, right, and the rules and regulations require, I know kids are signing contracts, I have to be at X, Y, and Z. I think creating an open dialogue with athletes has amazing potential, because you're probably going to get that kid who's just come from baseball practice to their 7 o'clock club practice that was an hour away from home, and they're going to be tired. And athletes don't like to admit that they're tired. I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm going to push through. And then they push through, and chances are they might not be performing to their standards or what they expected themselves. Then they're going to get frustrated with themselves, and then the spiral is going to kind of keep going down. Has everyone kind of seen that, right? And so creating a culture again where, as a coach, you can go up to a player and say, you seem kind of tired tonight. Are you doing okay, right? Simply asking that question, how are you hanging in tonight, gives an athlete the space to say, I'm not really hanging in, I'm here and I'm trying my best. And by being able to actually acknowledge that, what I often find is it kind of takes the pressure off their shoulders, being able to say, this is hard. They stop self-scolding, and then they actually play better, right? But when they're holding it in, we've all been there, I'm fine, everything's fine, just keep charging forward. And again, you're pulling from an empty tank. It's allowing yourself to acknowledge, this is hard. I'm trying my best right here, right now. Maybe it's not my optimal best, but if I'm giving 110% of my 75, I'm going to get a lot more out of myself than if I'm mad at myself for not giving 110%. What am I really going to get out of that? Great question. Yes.
Thank you for your talk.
Of course.
Regarding the student athlete, can you make a comment on the role of social media plays on this?
Yes, I actually just did a blog post on this the other day. Athletes are getting a lot of information from social media, necessary evil, right? And social media is not going away. It has a lot of really great stuff, but I will say I just had an athlete recently post-op ACL. We're on our call, and she's popping blueberries. And she looks at me, she's like, I heard that if you eat berries, you won't gain weight. And I was like, so where did we find that information? And she was like, on TikTok. And I was like, okay, so we want to make sure you are being provided with evidence-based information. She stopped eating the berries. I was like, no, keep eating your berries. I was like, but let's take a look at where we're getting that information from. And so in this blog post, what we talked about was encouraging student athletes who are going to be on their phone to find creditable sources. So if you're looking for nutritional information, are they a registered dietitian? Do they specialize in working with athletes? Now, again, that's a lot to ask of them. You know, a 13-year-old isn't necessarily scanning the web to be like, where is this information coming from? But as parents and as coaches, if you can encourage them, like, you want to get stronger, let's make sure you're getting information that's going to help you get stronger, right? And if you can frame it from that lens of performance optimization, all of the athletes want to get better. So when it comes at like, well, this is wrong information versus let's make sure you're getting the helpful, true information, I think it kind of shifts the lens at how much they just kind of doom scroll and take the bits and pieces. It makes the relationship with social media more conscious. Do you know what I mean? Instead of just like, I'm seeing it and they will absorb it whether or not they want to, but just starting to educate on that can be a helpful step because it's not going away. And there is some really good stuff out there. Yeah. Yes, I got you. Mike's coming.
Maybe this is the wrong question since you were talking about trying to be proactive with this stuff.
That's
but like
okay.
after a game,
Yep.
especially when it's a loss, right? Sometimes you get a couple of kids that are really upset because maybe they didn't play very well. The other team's trying to get onto the field. Parents are trying to get kids off. So you have like this limited time while you're trying to clean up your stuff, get off and everything. Do you have any like quick, like in that 5 minutes that you have to talk to them before the parents are dragging them away?
For sure.
Tips to help an athlete who just had a bad game.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate, yes, ideal world, this is all proactive, but not all the kids have time or access to a mental skills specialist. The good, better, how question is really, really great. So if you, so this idea of good, better, how actually comes from a military concept called after action review, where regardless of outcome, same 3 questions are asked, right? So if it's successful mission, same 3 questions. If it's an unsuccessful mission, same 3 questions. And the idea is that you're just objectively looking at what happened today, right? So instead of, I played poorly, I'm awful, oh my gosh, the college scouts are here, they're going to think I'm a terrible player. It's simply, yeah, not my best game. 1, I'm allowed to be disappointed, but if they get in the habit of asking those questions, what did I do well? Because even in the worst game, something good happened. And it could be, I had a figure skater once, she was like, today was terrible, everything was awful. And I was like, okay, let's work on finding some good, and she really couldn't find anything. And I was like, did you get to training early? She's like, yeah, I always do. It's like, okay, did you get a good warm-up in? She was like, yeah. I was like, so you were prepared today, right? You were physically ready to be on the ice. Did you keep fighting? That's good, right? Then they can start to see, well, maybe I didn't keep fighting today, but that is something I actually can control. Next game, when the spiral starts going down, they might actually better lock into that sense of fight because they've already identified that as something that they want to work towards. So those 3 questions can be really powerful, and doing it as a team can be even better because then you're recognizing in a team, you're going to have players who feel like they crushed it and players who feel like they didn't. Everyone answers the same 3 questions. I have a skating coach I work with, synchronized figure skating, and she has journals for the kids. And after every practice, because I work with them throughout their season at least once, if not twice a month, leading up to nationals. And they engage in good, better, how after every practice, and then they read them before the start of the next practice, because that better how then becomes their action items for that day. So just getting in that habit can be really helpful. Yeah. It's coming to.
This whole, conversation really spoke to me as a parent, as a coach, having a child who I feel like we've gone through some of these tactics too. Only 11, still somewhat young. But I guess just wondering if you have any guidance in terms of like red flags for students or for athletes in terms of, you're trying your best as a coach, you're still kind of seeing this same kind of like mindset. Like there's only so much that we can do, I guess, as coaches, and also how far that extends to what's happening at home or whatever, like how to how to, I guess, kind of like navigate that, or any kind of guidance from that perspective?
Also,
It's a loaded question.
I was going to
sorry.
say, also a tall order. My answer to that would be mental skills. You say, 11 years old. I actually look at this like, if people say I have 7-year-olds and they're like, isn't that really early for mental skills training? I'm like, no, because we're planting really great seeds about what success is, about how to fail effectively. So ideal world, like this sort of stuff even exists in schools. Do you know what I mean? Because school is a huge area of their performance. And if they're starting to learn these tools and strategies young, they're going to have a foundation. Might not stick for everything, but it's going to be there. In terms of red flags, I think when you start to notice the shift in confidence, and confidence is an interesting concept too, because I think confidence can often be tied in with self-compassion. So to be confident, you need to allow yourself the space to fail. And so when you hear that sort of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or like, why did I make a mistake? Or like, I got stuck on my mistake. That's a big one. I think I hear a lot, especially from the younger athletes. It's like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Red flags, or even like pink flags, like I always say, if you have these resources available, or where they exist, cough the McKaylee Center, like a session or two can be really powerful, and just saying like, yeah, you're not alone in this, and like, here are a couple things you can start to do. I don't need to work with a 7-year-old every week for 7 years, which I have some clients I've done. Awesome, right? Really great foundation, but like to say, here are 2 things that you can add to your pregame warm-up that might help when you make that mistake. Always a good place to start.
Excellent. And you flowed right in. You started to answer the question I was going to ask. You had a good example earlier about yourself, about needing confidence. And
Yep.
I was going to ask if you had any practicals or resources on helping, the athletes be confident.
Yeah.
Especially, right, it's about to start. You can tell, you can see their eyes are,
Getting big.
but,
Yeah.
to help that confidence.
For sure. Just in the same way I talked about the gratitude journal, I really like a wins journal, right? Like having each athlete at the end of practice write down what was the good thing for today. It can happen within the good, better, how exercise, because in that way you're kind of combining what was the success, what do I want to keep working on. But if they do that after every practice, think about how many times these kids are playing any of their sports, right? Just keep the collection. One of our greatest predictors of present success is past success, seeing that. Now, the downfall can be, I did that before, I have to do it again, right? Oh my gosh, I scored 4 goals in that game. If I don't score 4 goals today, I didn't do a good job, right? My job is to help athletes see, like, how did you work towards those 4 goals? What's in your control today, right? So using that past success to identify like why I took up space, I communicated with my teammates, right? Like really shifting their lens on success to encompass the process over perfection, and creating those conversations, keeping track of those wins can be really helpful. And again, cell phones, best and worst tools, they all have them for the most part, except for our tiny ones, but even they sometimes have them. So like having that list in their phone, they can access it right then and there. And I think we're done. Thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of the day.